Alright guys, welcome to my full-length Fire Mage PvP guide for BFA patch 8.3, Season 4, Corrupt the Gladiator season, the last season of BFA. And if you don't know, I actually came back to the game at the beginning of this season in January. I quit the game for 2 years. So coming back to the game, like being new to BFA, it was kind of overwhelming at first. Even though the Fire Mage playstyle is very similar to some degree with the Legion playstyle, there was a lot of new implementations like essences and Azurite traits and corruption that was a little confusing to me at first, a little overwhelming, and I felt kind of lost and had no guidance. I was wishing that there was a full-length video like this that I could kind of follow to get up to date with everything that was going on. And there are some good mage guides out there, but it wasn't like really leading me towards where I wanted to go. And also now it's kind of outdated, so I thought I'd make a more updated one. Also, over the past few months, I've been having a lot of success queuing RMP on the NA ladder. We're currently top 50, and we're going to be pushing rank 1 this season. So yeah, just everything started to click for me recently, and I feel like I've learned a lot. And even though I'm not the best fire mage, I feel like I can offer a lot of value to a lot of fire mages out there. Let's say you're a 1800 fire mage trying to push their first 2k rating, or you're a 2k fire mage trying to push your first 2400 gladiator, or you're already a gladiator and you want to start playing at a rank 1 level. I feel like I can definitely offer value to help you reach your next milestone, whether that be in this video or the later more advanced stuff that's going to be coming out soon. But yeah, let's get started. I'm going to be mostly covering the basic builds and the gearing. Like, let's just say you're a new fire mage, whether you're playing an alt or you're just returning to the game now and you're trying to get prepped to do some arenas. I'm going to go over how to get started, what you should be aiming towards, and then after that I'm going to go a little bit more into the gameplay side of things, breaking down certain ways you can land CC and win games. And then also going over the best 2v2 and 3v3 comps for fire mages currently, along with some basic macros to help you get started. First of all, we're going to go over the builds, starting with the racials. Pretty simple here. For the horde side, hands down, the best race is going to be Orc. The hardiness stun reduction passive is just way too strong. Honestly, I've rerolled Orc when I first came back to the game earlier this year, and I've probably sat like a total of 30 hours playtime of less stuns. So like, that's a lot of net gain. Like, every class nowadays, or not every class, but every comp you fight into has some sort of stun. So being able to sit a few seconds less stun throughout a game can actually, it sounds very subtle, but it really does add up and can mean a death or a win, you know? On horde side, there aren't many options. Like, I would just suggest going Orc, but you could play Blood Elf for the Arcane Torrent AoE purge. But mages already have Spellsteal, so it's not as valuable as if you were playing it as a different class. On the Alliance side, however, there is a little bit more flexibility. Generally, people like to just play Human for every man for himself, the Trinket for stuns on a 3-minute cooldown with Relentless rather than regular Trinket, so that way they can sit 20% less CC altogether. Not just stuns, but fears, polys, and all that. And then have a Trinket for stuns, which could be really good as well. A lot of the top tier mages usually play Human, but you could play Night Elf for the Shadow Meld, you know, clutch melds on bolts and coils and stuns on goes. You could play Void Elf for the extra mobility, or you could play Dwarf or Dark Iron Dwarf to remove poisons and bleeds and all that, which is especially good right now in this meta because a lot of the melee cleaves or even hybrid cleaves are using Gushing Wound corruption, and this racial actually removes Gushing Wound, so extra good in this current meta. But like I said, generally people will play either Orc or Human, but that's totally up to you. Alright, so moving on to the talent build. This is the basic build that beginner fire mages will usually run. This is a good start, not bad. In terms of like what you can mix and match, the first tier is the one where you have the most options. So you can either play Firestarter, Pyromaniac, or Searing Touch depending on your playstyle. If you're playing GPI spec with Memory Bracers, Searing Touch is pretty good. when you're playing, MLX, for example. And then if you're playing short combust spec with Fireball build, as opposed to Greater Pyroblast, then you can run Firestarter. That helps you get guaranteed crits when they're above 90%. It's like having a mini combustion, you could say. You actually get a lot more overall pressure with that. Or you can go Power Maniac for those RNG extra hot streaks. Totally up to you. Everything else is pretty standard, and you're going to be locked in this build for the most part. You want Shimmer nowadays to help you land polys, and Kite in Counterspell, so you can have extra damage without having to pop a rune and stand in it. Flame On, Ring of Frost for the extra CC. Ring of Frost is great for baiting kicks because it's on the same DR as Polymorph, so you can bait kicks with it on a separate tree and then land your sheeps. Or, double DB, triple DB ring. Living Bomb, the only reason you go Living Bomb is because there's nothing really better on that tree. You don't use Living Bomb much, it doesn't do much damage, but everything on this tree, Flame Patch, Conflag, and Living Bomb breaks CC, but Living Bomb's the only one where you can actually control it because, it's an actual ability rather than a passive. And then Meteor for the extra big damage every 45 seconds on setups. In terms of your PvP talents, you're always going to go Trinket and Temporal Shield, or Relentless and Temporal if you're human. And then the last two, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility, which we'll go into more detail soon. Alright, so there's two major ways in BFA to play Fire Mage in PvP, and that's either the Lucid Bracers build or the Reaping Flames build. So the Lucid Bracers build consists of Memory of Lucid Dreams Major Essence with the Hyper Thread Wrist Wraps Mechagon Workshop Bracers. So this build is the most amount of damage you could ever do as a Fire Mage in this expansion right now. This is the spec that PvE mages use because it's just insane amount of DPS. That being said though, outside of the 2 minutes, you're actually not going to be doing much, which is why this spec goes really good generally with Greater Pyroblast, because outside of the 2 minutes, you can spam Greater Pyros to bait kicks or maybe get some off here and there. It synergizes really well with like Destro Warlocks in 3s running MLX, because you can just spam Pies and spam Chaos Bolts. And then every 2 minutes you have like Combustion and Dark Soul, which is like your huge burst. So because it lacks the consistent pressure, it ties really well with GPI playstyle. And then Reaping Flames is a little bit more consistent damage. It's not that crazy of burst compared to Lucid Bracers in terms of just pumping Pyro straight for 10 seconds. But Reaping Flames, if used correctly, you can keep it on a 15-second cooldown rather than a 45 if you use it when the target's above 80% or below 20% HP. So you're going to be using it pretty much as you start your goes. It's really good with setup-based comps like RMP or FMP, for example, where you kidney the target with CC on the healer, and then you pop Reaping Flames when they're above 80%, or even use it as an execute when they're below 20. And keep the cooldown low, so every setup you have an extra like 50k to 100k damage. This actually hits more than Pyroblasts and can hit more than Meteors as well. So it's actually like a very crucial part of your damage rotation if you are playing a setup-based comp. So if you are going to be running Reaping Flames, the best minor essences to go are going to be Memory of Lucid Dreams, Conflict and Strife, and Vision of Perfection. So Memory for the extra Fire Blast procs here and there with the heals, and then Conflict for the extra versatility to make you tankier and do more damage. And then Vision of Perfection, this one's really good because you get 100 extra verse, or like around 1% extra versatility flat, and then also it shreds 25% off your Combustion cooldown. So rather than Combustion being a 2-minute cooldown, it's going to be 1.5 minutes by default. So this combo is really well with Reaping Flames because you can set up more often. And then with Lucid Bracers, you're going to run Breath of the Dying, Conflict and Strife. With the fourth one, or the third minor, it's a little bit more flexible. You can use whatever you want, but the Iris goes pretty well with this build because generally, like I said, you're going to be running GPI with this build, and having a little bit more haste here and there is going to help you get faster GPIs. So people always ask me, when do I use Reaping Flames? When do I use Memory Bracers? It seems like a lot of beginner Fire Mages get a little bit confused. So honestly, it depends on your playstyle and what you're doing. So for me, In threes, playing RMP, which is my main comp, I'm going to be using the far left build, using Reaping Flames without Mechagon bracers. I'll just use regular Haze Verse bracers for more stats. Generally, I'm going to be playing like a full verse build or like a half gush, half verse build. So having those extra stats help. And then also bracers, you don't get as much value out of it compared to if you were using Memory of Lucid Dreams. So if you pop Memory and pop bracers, you'll get 3 Fire Blast stacks back. Whereas if you're not using Memory and you pop bracers, you only get like 1.5 stacks back, which is still like an extra pyro or 2, but definitely not 3 or 4. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna be rocking Reaping Flames with Trinket, Temporal, and then Firestarter, which is the PvP talent that I use instead of GPI in this build. So your filler is going to be Fireball spam rather than GPI spam. And every time you use Fireball successfully, it's going to shred another 5 seconds off your combustion. So if you're using Vision of Perfection Minor, that already cuts your combustion cooldown by 30 seconds. And then using Firestarter, you're going to be shutting down an extra 5 seconds per Fire Blast. So technically, you can easily have like 1-minute combustions with this spec while using Reaping Flames every setup with Firestarter. And yeah, it's just an amazing build. I think it's highly underrated. A lot of the top mages, I actually like learned this from Mero from EU. He's the one that taught me this build a few months back. But it seems like a lot of people are catching on now. But yeah, so super strong build for setup-based comps. As for the third PvP talent, generally in 3v3, I'll take Klepto. Usually I only used to take Klepto against Resto Druids to insta-Klepto all hots, but I like to take it against everything. Like, if you're fighting mages, you can insta-Klepto cancel their combustion. If you're fighting paladins, you can insta-Klepto bops or, like, their divine favors. The only time that Klepto loses its value is versus like Mistweaver melee cleaves, because there's nothing really to Klepto, and you want to Spellsteal more often to get their hots off, or maybe like Dispriest jungles or something like that, you know. But generally, I'll run Klepto, and if I'm not running Klepto, I'll run Tinder for an extra fast Fireball every 8 seconds, or like Controlled Burn, or you can use Prismatic Cloak to like blink bolts. Netherwind Armor to try to be tankier, and then also you can use Dampen Magic, which is 20% less damage versus magic effects, but it also includes Gushing Wounds. So if you know you're fighting like a cleave that's rocking all full gushings, you can run Dampen Magic to reduce the overall gushing damage. So the third one, you have a little bit more flexibility, but generally I'll take Klepto. Next up is the same build, but Reaping Flames with bracers. Like I said, the bracers loses a lot of value if you're not rocking Memory of Lucid Dreams Major, but there are certain situations where the extra 2 Pyroblasts every 2 minutes can be really helpful, and that's when you're running the Spite Trinket. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Spite Trinket later, but that's pretty much when you're going for like one-shot setups, when you stack like 40 Corruption on a target, and they're taking extra damage and reduced healing. And you're rocking Reaping Flames in that situation, so you can get fat Reaping. Like, you can get like 200k plus Reapings on like Spite targets. It's actually disgusting. And then having bracers in that situation to get those couple extra pyros to finish the target. Super strong, but very situational. I only use this build if I'm running Spite, which I don't really do that much nowadays anyways. But I just thought I'd throw that option out there. Next up is going to be the Memory Bracers, the Lucid Bracers build. Like I talked about earlier, this is insane amount of burst. You're going to be pumping pyros for 10 seconds straight, the most amount of damage you could do as a fire mage in a short amount of time. But you're not going to have those short 1-minute combustions, and you're not going to have the ability to shred time off your combustion with Firestarter either. It's just going to be every 2 minutes, you're going to have guaranteed insane burst. And then outside of that, you're going to be spamming Greater Pyroblasts. So for the third tier, once again, you can rock Klepto, you know, Dampen Magic, Netherwind Armor, whatever, but Flame Cannon actually synergizes really well with Greater Pyroblast, because if you stack it up really high, you can spam Greater Pyros from like a mile away. Also, when you're spamming Greater Pyros, you're going to be stationary anyways. You're not going to be moving as much, depending on what comp you're fighting or playing. So yeah, those two synergize really well together. And then instead of going Firestarter PvP talent, you're going to be using Searing Touch, because like I said earlier, you're not going to be using Fireball as a filler as much. You're going to be mainly using Greater Pyro as a filler, so you're not going to get as much value using Firestarter in this build. And then Searing Touch is going to help you finish those your kill targets by getting those guaranteed crits when you run out of damage. Or say like they're really low, like 20%, and you'd rather cast a Scorch rather than a G-Pie to finish. And then like I said, lastly, the fourth choice is just gonna be running the same build but with a different third talent. As for your Azurite traits for your helm, shoulder, and chest piece, for PvP, the BiS is triple Blaster Master, triple Wildfire. For the off traits, the best ones you can go for are going to be Overwhelming Power. That's definitely BiS for you. But if you can't get that, Elemental Whirl is pretty good too. And then for the last ones, Cauterizing Blink, Quick Thinking, Resounding Protection, they're all pretty solid. It doesn't really matter as much. I just want to make sure you at least get triple Blaster Master, triple Wildfire. If you can't get triple Wildfire, at least you want to have triple Blaster Master. All right, next up, we're going to go over gearing your character. All right, as for the stat priority, it's going to go Verse, Haste, and then Mastery and Crit. So if you don't know, in PvE, Mastery is the best stat for Fire Mage because it just increases your overall Ignite damage by a insane amount. But in PvP, Verse is better because it not only increases your overall damage, but also the overall damage taken. So for every 1% Verse, it increases your damage by 1%, and it decreases the damage you take by 0.5%. So versatility, it's kind of like the best of both worlds, right? And then Haste is obviously really good because you have faster Polymorph casts, faster Fireballs, and G-Pie casts, which means you'll get in more filler and also have an easier time landing CC to score those kills. In terms of haste breakdown, every 64 haste stat is going to be 1% haste. And one thing to note here is at 26.5% haste, you're going to get 1.3 second polymorph cast times along with 3.5 second greater pyroblasts. So if you want to reach that haste breakpoint, it's pretty nice to have 26.5. That's like a general spot that a lot of fire mages like to play at. I would suggest you don't actually step into the arenas until you have at least 20% haste and at least 25% verse. I have way more than that, but that's like the bare minimum that you want to actually start playing arenas. Also, 28.01 will allow you to DB sheep relentless targets with no gap. Because let's say you have 26% haste and then you try to DB sheep Disc Priest with that's running relentless, like a human rally Disc Priest. You DB sheep, there's going to be like a little millisecond gap where they can use Prem, or like a Holy Pally can use Sack, and then you won't be able to chain it with no gaps. So that's something good to keep in mind. Also, this is a little bit ping dependent as well. So if you want to be extra safe, you can go for 29 if you want to DB sheep relentless, but it's generally not that big of a deal. Like in my gushing set, I only rock like 20% haste, and I have tons of verse. So this is nothing that's too important, but it's just good to know, especially if you are running a haste build playing G-Pie, but we'll go more into that later. In terms of BiS corruptions, there's a lot of different builds you can play, but the main one is full versatile. So having full versatiles is good in pretty much every situation as a fire mage in PvP, because like I said earlier, verse is your main stat, and even though versatile corruption got nerfed by 33% in PvP, it still remains your BiS corruption. So if you're just building your character now and you don't have any corruption sets, I would highly suggest you prioritize going for a full versatile set. You can also rock like one Surging Vitality verse proc and then rest versatiles. That's pretty good too. It just depends on what's better for you in terms of how much corruption resistance you have that week. If you want to min-max. One general rule of thumb is to not go over 39 corruption, because that's when the thing from Beyond will proc on you. So 39 or less corruption is generally best. So I would keep that in mind. So full verse, and then one verse proc, rest full verse, and then also a half and half gush verse seems to work pretty good too if you're running a comp like RMP or FMP. Gushing is really good for melee classes right now. It's not as good on Mage, but I've had a lot of success with it. Like rocking, for example, 5 gushings with 3 versatiles with like all verse sockets has felt pretty nice. with my spec because I play the fireball spec. So I'm just spamming fireballs, right? And every fireball I spam, the more chance Gushing can proc. So I feel like this build is only good if you're playing fireball spec, because if you're playing GPI spec, there's a lot more gaps in terms of your damage, because like Gushing can proc every hit and not on ignite ticks. So if you're spamming fireballs, there's more of a chance of proc as opposed to if you're spamming cheap-highs, because it's a longer cast time. I've seen some high mages play full gushing as well. I think that's very situational. Aside from that, Racing Pulse can be really good in certain situations if you are playing GPI. If you're rocking a Racing Pulse with like a Titan Vita trinket, for example, and they both proc, you can get like 2.6, 2.5, 2.4 second GPIs. I like to run one Racing Pulse with rest first amps or half haste amp, half first amps in 2v2 when I'm playing with a healer to get those really fast GPIs. I'll get more in depth about that later in another video, but yeah, like I said, this can be good. Haste amps and haste procs can be good if you're playing GPI, but once again, I would always prioritize a full versatile set first. As for the other corruptions like Twisted Appendage, Infinite Stars, they used to be good at one point, but they got heavily nerfed, and so I would not recommend that in PvP at all. It's either going to be full verse, half haste, half verse, or half gush, half verse, or full gush, depending on the situation. So if you want to check out my current build right now, my main PvP build, I'm rocking 7 versatiles at 38 total corruption. 7 versatiles, and that puts me at 44% verse with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sockets. If I want to, I can run my full verse set, which is 2 verse trinkets along with 7 versatiles and a Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness gives me extra stats as well. So I only have 1, but I'm trying to go for an extra one. And in this set, I have 53% verse, which is insane. And then I have a Gusher set, which is half and half, like I said earlier, 5 Gushing Wounds, 3 Versatiles. This one, I still have 38% verse because I have a lot of sockets on this set. So that's pretty solid. I'm actually prioritizing full socketing this set first right now. And then a lot of times in threes, like Gushing Wounds is like my first, second, or third highest damage at least, even if I'm only using 5 Gushings. And that's really good. I feel like that adds up. But at the same time, it's hard to tell. Like, full verse, I feel like is better in a lot of situations because you're just tankier and doing more flat damage. And it's also hard to see how much value you're getting out of versatile in terms of damage because, like, your details won't show how much extra damage you're doing with the versatile, whereas gushing is, like, very clear. But like I said, it's totally up to you. Always go for a full verse first, but I'm totally loving gushing right now. And then I have a haste set as well. This one's a work in progress, but it's pretty much 1 rank 3 expedient, 2 rank 2 expedients, 2 rank 3 versatiles, and a Racing Pulse with Vita Trinket. And with this, I have 36% haste. And then when my Vita and my Racing Pulse procs, I can have really fast GPIs. And I like to run this spec in 2v2, running like Rogue Mage or Mage Healer. This is just like a really nice spreadsheet showing when the specific corruptions are on the corruption vendor. I'll leave a link to it down below. So you can say like you want to get versatiles. The next round of versatile 3s come out on July 17th, so you can actually start stockpiling your echoes. So you can actually just buy all 6 or all 7 to fill up your whole verse set. Or say you want to get some gushings for your gushing set. The next Gushing Wounds comes out July 7th, for example. So yeah, this is definitely good to know. The link will be down below. All right, now we're going to be going over BiS Gear. For this is generally for those of you that are just starting to gear now, because obviously eventually you want like 475 pieces on everything and then 480 Azerite traits at least, if not 490 with full, with some 485 pieces if you're a Mythic Raider. But say like you're just getting your character now and you're just trying to get some 460, 465 pieces with the correct stats. This is just some good information in terms of farming that gear. So every week you want to at least do 115 key to get your Mythic Plus chest. That guarantees you a 475 piece. That's guaranteed corruption as well. After doing 115 key for that week, you can farm 14s, which will guarantee 465 piece, which is the highest you can get from just doing dungeons and farming gear. Or if that's too high for you, like say you have lower item level and 14 is too challenging for you, you can try to at least do 11s to get guaranteed 460 pieces. And if that's too hard for you, then I would try to at least do 8s to get 455 pieces guaranteed. And then right now we're going to dive into which dungeons you should be running as a Fire Mage to get the correct haste verse pieces you want. So as for the wrists, as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to be playing the Lucid Dreams bracers build, then you need these Mechagon bracers. This is from Mechagon Workshop. Honestly, like as long as you have the on use effect, the item level doesn't matter as much. But yeah, this drops from Mechagon Workshop. Also, ignore the item level. Obviously, you want to eventually get 475 on everything, but this is just like a basic template I'm using to show the stats. In terms of getting Haze Verse bracers for your Reaping Flames build, you can get a set from Waycrest Manor, or the Motherlode as well has a Haze Verse bracers. For your hands, there's Haze Verse hands from Underrot, but also you can craft your own with tailoring. This requires a lot of grinding, but I feel like it's definitely worth it, especially now that you can add corruption to your own pieces. With the tailoring gloves and pants, you're guaranteed a socket, but the stats are random. So you gotta sometimes maybe make 10 different pants to finally get the haste verse that you want. But once you get it, it's really good to have because it comes with a guaranteed socket. This requires a lot of grinding. I'm sure you can Google it in terms of how to get it, but I think it's definitely worth it. It's 470 as well, so. Next up, for your belt, you can get Haze Verse belt from Mechagon Workshop as well. So 2 BiS pieces come from that dungeon. For your legs, you can get it either from Siege of Borealis or Toldagor. They both drop Haze Verse. Toldagor has a little bit more haste, whereas Siege has more verse. So that's totally on you. Once again, as I said earlier, you can also craft legs along with gloves with tailoring, which is double the value with the tailoring profession. You can get some Haze Verse feet from King's Rest. And then you can get Haze Verse rings from a lot of different places. The 3 dungeons that drop it are Taldazar, King's Rest, and Waycrest. Keep in mind that the King's Rest version has more haste than verse, whereas the other 2 have more verse and haste. You can also get a Haze Verse ring from N'Zoth, the last boss of Ny'alotha. The heroic version is going to be 470 item level, and then eventually, if you can, you want to go for the mythic one, which is 485, which I'm trying to go for right now. My raiding guild is 11 out of 12 mythic. We're just starting N'Zoth now. I probably won't get this ring for a while, but I think, imagine putting a Gushing Wound on this piece. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention earlier that Gushing Wound scales with the item level you put it on. So if you are going to be rocking a Gushing, you want to try to put a Gushing on the highest item level possible. So if you can see here, my Gushings are all on 475 pieces. I actually just got these 485 pants from Carapace yesterday, so I'm going to try to put a Gushing on that too. Also, the other corruption, like the proc ones and the flat percentage ones, don't scale with item level. It's just the Gushing, so just keep that in mind. Back to the rings though, N'Zoth drops Haze Verse ring. Also, PvP actually drops Haze Verse ring as well. You can say like your lower rating, so you only have a 461. Eventually, you can boost it up with a trophy. If you get 2400 plus, you can boost it up to a 475. Generally, like you'll have random gear drop once you win arenas. Sometimes you'll get a socketed one, so I would try to save that and boost it up to a 470 or 475 later. And then also you can craft a ring with jewel crafting as well. But I wouldn't recommend it as much as tailoring because there's a lot of ways you can get rings right now in this current season, whereas pants and gloves are harder to get, and plus you can get both pants and gloves from one profession. As for weapons, you can get a Haze Verse sword from Shrine of the Storm and a Haze Verse dagger from King's Rest. And then for Haze Verse offhand, you can get one from PvP. Actually, it's funny. Like the only way you can get a Haze Verse offhand right now is through PvP. So this is going to be a random drop, or you can get it from capping. And once again, you can boost this to a 475 later if you get a trophy as well. As for the trinkets, there's a lot of different trinket loadouts that you can use in PvP. But generally right now, I like to use one on-use trinket along with a versatility PvP trinket. So right now I'm using a Mythic Claw with a 475 badge. For verse trinkets, you can either use badge or insignia, which is not an on-use, but a proc int. I currently prefer badge, so I can have those huge combusts every 2 minutes. I just macro this in with my combust. Extra good if you're running Memory of Lucid Dreams with Bracers build. But I prefer this just because I got lucky and have a socket on it. And plus, I just, like I said, I like being able to on use every 2 minutes. But the proc one's good too. I see some high rated mages prefer this over badge. That's totally up to you. And then as for on use trinket, I'm using a Mythic Claw, socketed Mythic Claw. I do have a Voodoo as well. I actually did a lot of testing and realized eventually that Claw is way better than Voodoo. So the thing with Voodoo is it's a lot burstier. So after 6 seconds, it explodes for a shit ton of damage, and it can crit for like over 150k sometimes, which is crazy. Whereas Claw is like a dot that is just spread over 8.5 seconds. It's more consistent damage, whereas Voodoo, if you get the whole 6 seconds, it's more bursty. But the thing with Voodoo is it has like a long travel time, whereas Claw immediately connects to your target. Also, with Voodoo, during the travel time, if the target LOSs you, like say they line you with a pillar, it doesn't connect. It literally just disappears into thin air, which is super stupid. It's almost like you don't have the trinket at all. Whereas Claw connects immediately and just starts doing damage immediately. Also, Voodoo, to get full value out of it, you need to make sure all 6 seconds sits so it doesn't get dispelled. Whereas Claw, even if you just get like 6 out of the 8.5 seconds, you're still getting a lot of value. So I would recommend getting Claw over Voodoo for sure, but Voodoo is a decent placeholder until you get a Claw. All right, so I already mentioned this earlier, but these are the two options for your verse trinkets. This ties in really well with your verse amps because it scales. Like, if you have a lot of verse amps, just putting one of these on gives like 5% verse. It's actually crazy. You can also use Maledict in certain situations, which could be really good against like Ardruids or healers that are using Vitality Conduit. Say like they pre-vitality your sheep go, you can just pop a Maledict and it'll counter some of the vitality heal to help you score the kill. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the Vita Titan Shard can be really good into your haste build if you are playing a haste build in 2s or MLX, for example. This can be really good for those faster GPIs, and then the proc ties in really well with Racing Pulse as well. I've been loving this recently in 2s. Like, it's actually, I hate GPI playstyle because of how slow it is, but with these haste procs, it actually makes it really fun. And then last but not least is the Gladiator Spite Trinket, the infamous Gladiator Spite Trinket. This is a trinket that you can use to set up crazy deadly goes when you're playing more setup based comps. I use this for a while. I don't use it as much anymore because RMP, generally this is good against comps that feel like unkillable, like super tanky comps. But right now RMP is really strong because of the verse nerfs and the conflict major nerf. So we don't really have troubles. There's like no comp that's like extremely hard for us to kill right now. But sometimes we like to pull this out. We also, Spite got nerfed recently too, whereas before you could like drop a Spite on a sap and triple sap into like a full blind and then let it stack up to like 40 and just one-shot something. But now Spite puts you in combat, so you can't triple sap anymore, so you would have to like sap into a half sheep if you can, into another short sheep, into like a blind or DB, and then kidney go. But yeah, this is still a good trinket. I would recommend using it into certain comps that you feel like you're having troubles against in terms of like survivability. It's also really good against like warlocks. Spite definitely counters warlocks. So yeah, this is definitely an option. I might make a separate video on this trinket later because yeah, I have a lot to say about this one. And then lastly, one thing before we finish off is the Crafted Engineering Helm. This thing is actually really good because of the auto self cauterizer. So this has a chance to remove a random bleed effect. So this is really good against like assassination rogues. You can use this instead of your regular Azurite helm when fighting Asso rogues or like feral druids or even warriors. But one little thing that a lot of people don't know is this: when this procs, it can remove gushing wounds as well. And because gushing is so common right now, and it's definitely in the meta, this helm is extra good. The only downside is it only has a wildfire but no blaster master, so you're gonna lose one blaster master. But I think it's worth it against teams that are stacking gushing wounds, or like Asso Rogues and Feral Druids especially. So quick little tip right there. So right now on my mage, in terms of professions, I'm using tailoring and engineering to rock the helm, which I don't use very often, but it's good to have. And then I have the crafted pants as well. And the gloves. Okay, so one thing I forgot to mention was visions in terms of gearing. So if you're first starting out, I would recommend doing at least 3 5 masks per week. Or if a 5 mask's really hard, at least doing 1 5 mask and then a 4 mask and a 3 mask. Because then you can get guaranteed 470 item level piece, a 465 and a 460 for that week. And even if you don't get the correct corruption on it, because you're guaranteed corruption, if it's correct stats at least, then you can cleanse the corruption off the piece and then buy the corruption you want by looking at the spreadsheet and saving your echoes. So doing at least 3 to get those guaranteed item level pieces is very crucial for when you're first starting to gear up. Once you have a decent amount of stats in item level, I feel like if you really want to min-max, like all your sockets, you should at least try to do 5. That's what I'm trying to do now on both my mages, is 5 per character per week, which is like 10 visions a week. I also have like a Warlock ult that I'm trying to keep up with, but mainly I'm going to try to do 5 on each mage. And then per full 5 mask vision, if I'm like getting all the caches and all the crystal spawns and like full clearing, I'm guaranteed 5,000 corrupted mementos. So 5,000 times 5, that's 25k corrupted mementos. And then I can buy a socket. I can add a socket to a piece of gear. And that's how, like right now, my gushing set has like almost full sockets. It's because I've been farming visions. And honestly, I haven't been doing it that religiously. Like, I could have been farming it a lot harder. Like, some weeks I would only do 1 5 mask. And then some weeks I would do maybe 2 or 3. But I used to, like, not do 5. It's only now that I'm going to start doing 5 to fully deck out this whole set. And then, like, fully deck out my full verse set. And then eventually my haste set. And then my PvE set as well. I want to have full mastery gems. But yeah, doing 5 full 5 mask clears per week is going to net you 1 socket a week. Alright, so I'm going to quickly give a brief explanation on the Lucid Bracers Burst, if you don't know already. So this is pretty much like a PvE rotation. The only difference is in PvE, you would pop a Rune of Power first before you use this. But in PvP, obviously, it's going to be really hard to get a Rune of Power off before you're bursting. It's like really hard to line it up. You could use it just to troll in like Battlegrounds or 2s maybe, but like low-rated 2s. But yeah, so here, let me slow this down. So generally, before you pop this burst, you want to land some CC on the healer. Right here, I'm doing 2v2 with the Resto Druid. We land a clone on the healer. I Sheep the Hunter. I start getting a G-Pie first. You don't always need to get a G-Pie first, but this is just when the stars align. I'm able to get one off before I burst. So you're going to get the G-Pie off. You're going to Meteor, first global, and then pop Memory of Lucid Dreams with Combust. Combust is off a global cooldown, so you can use it at the same time as Memory. So one important thing to note here is that you can press Combustion after you press Meteor, and it'll still crit, but it has to be before the Meteor lands. So you can like Meteor, then Combust, but the Combustion has to be before the Meteor hits the ground, and then it will guarantee crit. And then you'll pop Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, and then Bracers. And then you see how I get 3 stacks of Fire Blast back from popping Bracers. One important thing to note is that the way Bracers works is it refunds, like it reduces the remaining cooldown of your 3 most recently cast spells by 5 seconds. So at least 2 out of the 3 spells have to be a Fire Blast in order to get 3 stacks back with memory up, okay? So let's rewind here for a second. Okay, so if you notice, the last buttons I pressed was Fire Blast, Pyroblast. So the last 3 ones were Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast. So because 2 out of the 3 were Fire Blasts, you'll notice that I get 3 stacks back here. I pop Bracers, get 3 stacks back. I pop another Pyro, Fire Blast again, Pyroblast again, Fire Blast again, Pyroblast again, Fire Blast again, and the target goes down. Best case scenario, you get a G-Py off first before you do this, but that's not something you need 100% of the time. Another thing is if you have a hot streak already before you do this burst, then you can get a couple extra pyros in. Instead of having to use 2 Fire Blasts to get a pyro, you can already have a pyro lined up. Also, another thing to remember is midway through this rotation, you might have like a Lucid Dreams proc, so you get an extra charge of Fire Blast. So right here, this is not a perfect rotation. You'll notice that at the end, I actually get one more Fire Blast, but I don't use it. So right here, I could have Pyro Blasted one more time into another Fire Blast and then Bracered for an extra Pyro. But this is just the general rotation, though. Hopefully, it makes sense. I'll put the rotation on the screen. All right, so next I'm going to break down the Reaping Flames burst. It's very similar to the Bracers burst, except you don't have Bracers, and instead of popping Memory, you're going to be using Reaping Flames first global while they're still above 80%. So let's say this is the healer right here. Make sure the healer is in CC before you do this most of the time. You're gonna press Meteor, Combust, Reaping Flames, Fire Blast, Fire Blast, Pyro Blast, Fire Blast, and then that's pretty much your burst. It's a lot shorter, but if you want the best burst possible, you want to have a hot streak first. But honestly, it's kind of hard to explain bursts in PvP because it's so situational and dynamic. Like, not always will you be able to get the perfect setup. Sometimes it won't be above 80%, so you won't be able to Reaping Flames. Sometimes you're not going to have a global to connect the Meteor because and maybe all the enemies are stacked. One thing to note about Meteor is it spreads damage equally. So say there's like 3 targets stacked together in the arenas. If you Meteor, you're not gonna get as much value on the kill target because the damage will spread. So a lot of times, like say you see the healer right here. This is the healer, right? And this is the kill target. You want to make sure you aim your Meteor like this so it only hits 1. And that's how you get max value. All right, next up for your CC as a Fire Mage. Your main one's obviously Polymorph, your spammable CC. This is the one you're going to be using the most in every situation. You're going to be using it to land CC on healer to score kills and also rotating them throughout your enemy DPS to peel for yourself and your teammates. Also, you have Ring of Frost on a 45-second cooldown on the Frost tree, which is on the same DR as Polymorph. The nice thing about this is like it's the same CC pretty much, but it's AoE and on a separate school. So a lot of times, the thing about Ring is you can use it. Say like in 3s, they have a kick up. They have 1 kick up because you can either kill target, but the other person has kick. You can like bait kick. You can precast Ring when there's 3 seconds left on the last CC, and then bait kick and then just sheep off after. Or other ways to use this, like say if the enemy healer is CC'd behind the pillar, you can snipe a Ring without even being in the healer's line of sight. That's something that's really good with Ring that you can't do with Polymorph. Or you can like get double DBs or triple DBs into triple rings, which is like insane setup. It's like the best CC chain in the game if you can get it on all the entire enemy team. And the next up, like I said, DB is your 20-second disorient. This can be used for immediate peels or used to set up CC chains. Keep in mind this does DR with blind and fears as well. So if you are playing with a warlock or a priest or a rogue or a paladin that uses blind, keep that in mind. You want to make sure you're tracking your DRs. Then Frost Nova Root, and then also Flame Strike Slow is really good too if you're playing melee cleaves and you have a Hot Streak proc. You can use your Hot Streak proc to, instead of instant pyro, you can use it to instant Flame Strike Slow and use that to kite with your Novas and your Blinks and DBs and then rotate spam Sheeps. So once again, this is just showing an example of what DRs are on what school for RMP, for example. All right, next up, I'm going to give some couple examples of the best comps for Fire Mage in each bracket. In 2s, the famous Rogue Mage setup-based double DPS comp. This is overall, hands down, my favorite comp to play in 2s. It's super fast-paced. You have a couple kill windows to win the game, and then in between that, you got to try to survive and reset. It's always going to be fast-paced, quick games, which I like. No dampeners here. You can play this as Fire Sub or Fire Asa. In 2v2 though, Fire Sub is definitely stronger because of Shadow Dance and Duel. With Shadow Dance, you can chain stun more and chain saps. And then when you do finally run out of CC, you can duel the kill target or duel the healer to CC as you finish the kill target. There's a lot more utility and CC chains, and you can just kill whatever with this. Whereas Fire Asa does a lot of damage, but there's not as many setups, and it's more of like a healer killer comp. Next up, you can play Mage Lock, a little bit more scuffed, but I've made this work at a pretty high rating before. It's mostly just like shit tons of birds. You got to really kill fast with your Combustion and Dark Souls and Bolts and Pies. You can also run Fire Windwalker too as a double DPS, but this is just the worst version of Mage Rogue in my opinion. In terms of healers, the best is either with Resto Druid or Holy Priests. Having those clones and bashes and rake stuns to get those G-Pies off, it's so huge. And also Vortexes too. I think Druid is the best healer, and then Holy Priests are pretty good too because they also have a stun with like MCs. You can do some crazy G-Pie MC combos. I have a video on that like from a few months back playing with Shwazy. Really fun comp, but the only problem is there's like a huge lack of Holy Priests right now. So generally you're going to be playing Fire Resto. You could make this work with maybe a Holy Paladin as well, but you don't have the Vortexes, you don't have the MCs or the clones, so I feel like it's not as good, but you could make it work still. In terms of 3v3, you obviously got RMP, which is the comp I'm running right now. Definitely best with Assassination Rogue rather than Sub because it's just way more damage overall. This is just the purely setup-based comp, which is the most fast-paced, least dampening Fire Mage comp there is, in my opinion. I've always been more of a setup-based player, so this is more tailored to my playstyle. But you could play MLD, which is also an S tier comp, just like RMP. This is super deadly because you have two spammable CCs. You have Polymorph and Fear with two, well, not spammable, but two very hard-hitting abilities, G-Pie and Chaos Bolt, and then you have like Dark Soul and Combust. So this is super scary to fight because you don't know what to lock. You lock a Poly, you get Feared. You lock a Fear, you get Poly. You lock a Pie, you get Bolted. You lock a Bolt, you get Pied. Like, this is just the best. Like, if you watched like the NA tournaments recently, Cloud9 plays this. And yeah, just a very, very, very good comp right now. A lot of fun too. And this can work with Resto Druid or Mistweaver generally, even a Holy Paladin too. And then next you got Warrior Mage Monk or WMP, WMM. Fire Mage Arms Warrior Mistweaver also works with a Paladin. This is another hybrid cleave you can play. More of a dampener compared to playing with a Rogue, but pretty solid comp as well. You can play Fire Windwalker Holy, which is also seen in tournaments as well. It's also setup based like RMP, but with a different type of utility. And then you can also play FMP as well, which is super bursty, also very fast paced, similar to RMP. Alright, to conclude this video, we're going to go over some basic macros now. Macros nowadays in 2020, they're very basic. We don't have any fancy Swifty one-shot macros anymore. They're pretty just like bare bones, just things to help you play the arena in an easier way. So first things first is Arena 123 / focus macros. So if you see right here, I actually have like most of my action bar hidden because they're mostly just like 1, 2, 3 macros or abilities that don't have cooldowns that I don't actually need to track with my own eyes, so I can just hide them. I can find them, but not have them on my screen. My binds are going to look a little confusing. I don't want to dive too deep on it right now, but for the most part, I have like page up and down and delete and home, all that stuff bound to my mouse. So if you're confused on why like my CS is on page up, that's why. But like I said, yeah, I just have most of this hidden. But the reason I like 1, 2, 3 macros, I personally think 1, 2, 3 is better for Mage if you have enough keybind space for it. I feel like being able to CS all 3 targets in the arena, or Polymorph, or Spellsteal, or Pie all 3 targets without actually having them targeted it's like the fastest way, like especially Counterspell. To be able to have my like thumb on like whatever I want to Counterspell and just tap it as they're casting, it allows for really fast reactions. Also, with pies, a lot of times you have to switch your focus to focus pie, but with this, it's just so convenient. If I am playing pie, a lot of the time the enemy teams are just so confused. They have no idea what I'm gonna pie because I'm never actually pieing, or half the time I'm not even pieing like the guy I have targeted. So yeah, super convenient. I would highly recommend it. But if not, you can go with focus macros too. I like to use both because 1, 2, 3 for arena, and then like if I get ganked in world PvP, for example, and I'm trying to 1v2, obviously having focus macros in that situation is good as well. So basically for 1, 2, 3 macros, this is what it looks like: /cast, and then in brackets target equals arena 1, and then you can swap that to 2 and 3. I like to do that for Spellsteal as well as Counterspell and GPie, like I said earlier. And then I recently made one for Klepto CS, so something that Spellsteals and Counterspells in one global. This one's a little gimmicky though. You got to make sure you're holding a global because Counterspell's off GCD, whereas Spellsteal is on a GCD. So this can work, but you got to make sure you're not on a global first. So if you don't want to use 1, 2, 3 macros, or you don't have enough bind space, then focus macros will do as well. That's what this macro looks like: /cast, and then in brackets target equals focus. And then I do that for focus polymorph along with focus counterspell, etc., etc. One really nice macro to have is the set focus mouseover. So like in world PvP, if you are getting ganked, you can just mouse over the target you want to set focus and then tap the macro. I have it bound to alt caps lock, so then I can just set focus instead of having to click them and then click set focus, you know. Also, yeah, to clear it, you just like, whoops. If you want to clear it, you just like mouse over nothing and then press the button. Also, if you want to set focus your current target, you can just press it while you have something targeted, and then it'll set it to focus as well. Super convenient. This is what it looks like. I'll leave all these macros in the description down below so you can just copy paste it easily. Next up, you obviously have your Dispel Curse macros to get those hexes, get those havocs. That's just /cast, and then in brackets target equals, and then the name of your party member, and then remove curse. I have one for my healer and then one for my DPS. Next up, I have cancelaura ice block macro. Some people like to do this to their actual ice block, but I like to just set it to my counter spells and my fire blast. The two abilities that I would most likely be using coming out of an ice block would be fire blast or counterspell. Like say you get CC'd in the game, and then it's like the win condition, so then you can like block off the CC if your healer doesn't have the spell for you, and then instantly CS coming out of it. So like this is me pressing block and then spamming my CS, and then I can land a kick. Hey, so I'm pretty much using the block as a trinket. Or if you want to come out of block late, then you can press fire blast. So that's pretty much just going to be /cancelaura ice block and then /cast fire blast. In my opinion, I think it's best to have /cancelaura ice block on fire blast in CS, but I mean that's totally up to you. You can put it to whatever you want. Next up is my combustion macro. Since I'm an orc, I just add my racial blood fury, which gives me 400 extra intellect on a 2-minute cooldown, and then I add my corrupted gladiator's badge, which also gives me 4k int as well, and then cast combustion. I don't like to put Memory of Lucid Dreams into this. I used to before, but I actually find it better to use it separately. There are very rare specific situations where you'll want to use them separately. Maybe in like a 1v1 situation, you could, like if you're fighting a rogue, you can force cloak by just using combust only and then using memory to finish them after cloak ends. The situations like that, like I don't always want to use that at the same time. Same with PvE. I'll like pre-pop memory before I combust. So, I mean, you can macro them together, but I just found after playing a long time that it's nicer to have it bound separately, to have the option to use it separately. Next up is your cancelaura macros. This one, say if you're fighting like an Arm Pal mirror and you Spellsteal bop, and you're like training the mage, you want to be able to cancel your bop. Same with like a combustion. If you klepto an enemy's combustion, they might klepto it back or Spellsteal it back, right? So by canceling it after you steal it, they can't get it back. Because like say your rogue has like all full bleeds on the mage and you steal a bop from the rogue, and then this Mage Spellsteal is there, bot back, that's gonna screw your rogue over, right? So having a cancel aura for bop, combustion, and then like Druid Hots, and also arcane power. I don't know why that's not in here right now. I usually have that. Now that I've been fighting arcane mages a little bit more recently, I like to bind this to my mount. So I just like press my mount button whenever I want to cancel my buffs. It's pretty easy instead of having it on a complete separate bind, but you can do it to whatever you want, a whole separate bind. If you want, you can have one for your ground mount and your flying mount, and then have different buffs according to, like, if you can have just combust and arcane power for the ground mount, and then for the other one you can have bop and hots. Totally up to you. And then my last macro is my Flame Strike macro. So this one, I just changed the tooltip for a counterspell just so I can track my counterspell easier. Having multiple of the same icons sometimes helps you track it, and I don't know. It's a personal thing. One of my weaknesses is like locking correct polys at the right situations, especially in mirrors. So it's been helping me out. And plus, yeah, I don't like having random abilities that don't have cooldowns on my bars. I just feel like it takes up too much space. Like I don't have to see a Flame Strike icon. I don't have to see a Polymorph icon. I don't have to see a Spellsteal icon, which is why I have most of my stuff hidden. Oh no, actually Spellsteal is good for Klepto, never mind. But you get the point. Like Scorch, for example. You don't have to do that though, that's just me. And then this one I have /cast and in brackets at cursor Flame Strike. This one's nice, so you can like drop your Flame Strike without actually having to like have the AoE animation. And then so it's pretty much taking off one less input. I like to have this just for Flame Strike, not Meteor or Ring, because Meteor and Ring, you have to be more precise with it. And you actually have to aim. Whereas Flame Strikes, I'm usually using when I have no more CC, I'm just kiting, trying to survive, and I'm using it as a slow. It just makes it so I can Flame Strike easier. That's an optional one, though. One last thing, there's a really good website called PvP Check. If you are looking for arena partners, this is pretty convenient because you can just go to the website and look people up and see their current rating. You can see the highest rating they've been, see what corruptions they're running, what build they're running. It's really, really good if you're playing with LFG a lot. I'm sure you know about this website already, but if you don't, I would highly suggest it. Makes it easier to find partners around your skill level. I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. Alright guys, that concludes the full-length Fire PvP guide. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave it in the comments down below, and I'll try my best to get to them. Or you can tweet at me. Also, make sure to check out my Twitch stream. I stream like 4 to 5 days a week. I'm always streaming my 3 sessions, my 2s. You can always ask me questions in my chat too. I'll try my best to get back to you if I'm not busy during a session or something. Another thing is I'm going to start doing one-on-one Fire Mage coaching soon. So if this is something you may be interested in, you can join the Discord link. It's right there on the screen, and I'll also leave a link down below in the description. Or you can hit me up, send me a DM at Hansol7900. I haven't really thought of prices yet. I'm going to definitely sort that out very soon, but we can maybe hop in a Discord call for an hour. You can record some of your gameplay. We can review it together. I can break down the matchup. If you have any questions, you can ask me, directly. Aside from that, I'm going to just be making this Discord for Fire Mages that love to do arenas, and I'll put some resources in there. Keep it updated with, up-to-date free guides as well. But yeah. That's about it. Thanks for watching. Leave a like below. I'm going to be making a macro video. Sorry, not a macro, but an add-ons video soon, going over my entire UI because I've been getting that requested a lot too. But yeah, aside from that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.